Welcome to Never Forgotten, where Ashley pays tribute to extraordinary lives that continue to live on through memory and meaning. This channel honors beloved figures from film, music, culture, and beyond, reflecting on their impact, their achievements, and the inspiration they shared. Together, we remember their stories and celebrate legacies that time can never erase. Don Schlitz was one of the most influential songwriters in modern music, known for crafting lyrics that shaped generations, while often remaining outside the spotlight himself. He passed away at the age of 73 after a sudden illness, leaving behind a legacy defined by storytelling, emotional honesty, and timeless songwriting. Born on August 29, 1952 in Durham, he grew up surrounded by Southern culture, family stories, and everyday experiences that later influenced his writing. From a young age, he was more interested in how words could express feeling and meaning than in performing, developing a deep respect for storytelling as an art form. In his early 20s, Schlitz moved to Nashville, where he faced the challenges common to many young writers: rejection, uncertainty, and financial struggle. Despite this, he continued writing with patience and belief that meaningful songs would eventually find their place. His breakthrough came with The Gambler, recorded by Kenny Rogers, a song that became a defining moment in country music history. Its narrative style and life lessons resonated widely, earning major recognition and establishing Schlitz as a leading songwriter. He later wrote more than 20 #1 hits, including classics performed by artists such as Randy Travis, Keith Whitley, and Garth Brooks. His contributions earned him induction into both the Country Music Hall of Fame and the Songwriters Hall of Fame. Even with widespread success, he remained grounded, often returning to small, intimate settings in Nashville to stay close to the craft of songwriting. Don Schlitz is remembered for proving that songs can do more than entertain. They can carry meaning, emotion, and stories that stay with people long after the music ends. James Chance, born James Siegfried, emerged from New York's late 1970s underground as one of the most unpredictable and boundary-pushing figures of the no-wave movement. Working as a saxophonist, keyboardist, and vocalist, he developed a style that deliberately blurred the lines between punk's raw urgency and jazz's improvisational freedom, creating a sound that felt both chaotic and tightly controlled at the same time. Early in his career, he performed with Teenage Jesus and the Jerks before forming James Chance and the Contortions, a group that quickly became central to the downtown experimental scene. On stage, his performances were known for their intensity and unpredictability, often challenging audiences with abrasive energy and sudden shifts in rhythm and tone, reflecting his refusal to conform to traditional musical expectations. He also recorded under the name James White and the Blacks, where he explored funk-influenced arrangements, and appeared in the cult film Downtown 81, which captured the creative atmosphere of the era. Over time, he continued to evolve through various projects, including The Flaming Demonics and James Chance and Terminal City, maintaining a consistently experimental approach. He passed away at the age of 71 after a period of illness, leaving behind a legacy defined by fearless creativity and a lasting influence on punk, jazz, and avant-garde music scenes. Jessie Jane, born Cynthia Ann Howell on July 16, 1980, became widely known in the 2000s as a prominent figure in the adult entertainment industry, recognized for her on-screen confidence, charisma, and strong screen presence. She gained international attention as part of the popular Pirates film series, which significantly raised her profile within the industry and contributed to her becoming one of its most recognizable names of that era. Over time, she also made appearances in mainstream entertainment, including roles in productions such as Starsky and Hutch and Entourage, reflecting her crossover into broader media visibility. After nearly 2 decades in the industry, she stepped away from adult films in 2017, leaving behind a career that earned her multiple Hall of Fame inductions, including recognition from AVN XRCO, and Night Moves, highlighting her impact and longevity in the field. She was often described by colleagues as energetic, professional, and highly engaging in her work. Jessie Jane passed away at the age of 43 in Moore, Oklahoma, where she was found alongside her boyfriend. Authorities later reported her death as resulting from an accidental drug overdose involving fentanyl and cocaine. Her passing marked a sudden and tragic end to a career that had made her a well-known figure in her industry and beyond. Kazuko Shiraishi was a pioneering Japanese poet and translator whose work helped redefine post-war modernist poetry through experimentation and performance. Born on February 27, 1931 in Vancouver, British Columbia, she later moved to Japan, where she became active in avant-garde literary circles that encouraged innovation and artistic freedom. Her early development was shaped by Katsue Kitazono's VOU poetry group, which provided a platform for experimental writing and led to her first published collection in 1951. Her poetry became known for its bold, improvisational style, often influenced by rhythm, sound, and spoken performance. She frequently collaborated with jazz musicians, blending poetry readings with live music to create an expressive and unconventional form of artistic presentation that challenged traditional literary norms. Over the course of her career, she participated in international readings and festivals, gaining recognition as one of Japan's most original poetic voices. Her work attracted global attention, with American poet Kenneth Rexroth describing her as the Allen Ginsberg of Japan and helping bring her writing to English-speaking audiences through published translations. Kazuko Shiraishi passed away at the age of 93, with no publicly confirmed cause of death disclosed. She is remembered for her fearless creativity and for expanding the boundaries of poetry through performance, language, and cross-cultural expression. The statement that Nick Pope passed away in 2026 is not accurate. As of verified public information, Nick Pope is still alive. Pope originally worked as a civil servant in the UK government, including time at the Ministry of Defense. In 1991, he was assigned to a desk that reviewed reports of unidentified aerial phenomena. The role was relatively small within the department, but it placed him in a unique position of examining public and military sightings that often had no clear explanation. While many reports were later attributed to conventional causes, the experience sparked his long-term interest in the subject. After leaving government service, Pope became a public commentator, author, and media contributor. He has appeared in documentaries, interviews, and panel discussions, where he shares his perspective on UFO-related reports in a cautious and analytical way. Rather than claiming definitive answers, his approach has generally focused on evaluating evidence and encouraging open discussion. Over the years, he has remained a recognizable figure in conversations about unexplained aerial phenomena, balancing skepticism with curiosity. His public work continues to center on analysis rather than certainty, and he is widely known for helping bring a more structured and investigative tone to discussions in this field.
London stays grey in a way that feels permanent rather than temporary, especially in St. John's Wood, where the streets seem to soften under low light. Inside a modest room, there is a piano placed near a window that rarely lets in anything dramatic from outside. It is not a studio built for spectacle, just a lived-in space where sound exists for its own sake. Paul McCartney sits there often now at 83, though the number still feels disconnected from the image most people carry of him. The man once known as a young member of the Beatles is no longer rushing through airports or screaming arenas. Instead, he plays slowly, carefully, as if each note is something he is reintroducing to himself. The piano keys are worn, familiar under his fingers, but the tempo has changed with time. He pauses often, letting silence sit between chords. In those pauses, memory seems to fill the room more than sound. There is Liverpool in 1957, small clubs filled with cigarette smoke, the early shape of songs not yet written. There is also loss layered into everything, friends gone, decades past, a world that no longer looks like the one he began in. The room is ordinary, but the life contained in it is not. Liverpool beginnings and family loss. Paul McCartney's early life in Liverpool was shaped by ordinary surroundings that later became extraordinary in hindsight. The house on Forthland Road was filled with the everyday noise of post-war working-class life. Conversations in the kitchen, a radio humming softly, footsteps on stairs, and music whenever his father, Jim McCartney, sat at the piano. Music was not treated as ambition, but as part of the household atmosphere. Jim had once led a jazz band, and that influence lingered quietly in the home. Paul's mother, Mary McCartney, was the emotional center of the family, working long hours as a nurse and midwife while maintaining stability at home. Her death in 1956, when Paul was only 14, altered the structure of his life in a way he would only fully understand later. The sudden absence did not immediately translate into visible grief. Instead, it reshaped everything quietly. The house became different without changing physically. Years later, this loss would reappear in unexpected places in his music, including the dream that inspired Let It Be, where his mother's voice seemed to return briefly with reassurance. That experience became symbolic of how memory and music intertwined for him, forming a private emotional language that persisted, even as his public life expanded beyond imagination. Meeting John Lennon at the church fete. The meeting between Paul McCartney and John Lennon at a church fete in Woolton in 1957 is often described as a turning point in music history, though at the time it was simply an introduction between two teenagers. The setting was unremarkable. A small stage in a garden, local families gathered, a skiffle band called the Quarrymen playing for modest attention. Lennon already had a reputation in Liverpool as confident, sharp-tongued, and musically driven. When Paul was introduced to him, he did not try to impress through words, but through performance. He picked up a guitar and played 20 Flight Rock, demonstrating not only technical skill, but unusual musical memory for someone so young. Lennon noticed immediately. What stood out was not just ability, but ease, the sense that Paul understood music instinctively. That moment led to an invitation to join the band. Neither of them could have predicted that this casual exchange would evolve into one of the most influential partnerships in modern culture. Their connection was not instant friendship, but recognition. Each saw in the other a rare combination of ambition and talent. The world outside continued unchanged that afternoon, yet the direction of popular music had subtly shifted inside that small garden. Formation of the Beatles and early rivalry. After Paul joined John Lennon's group, which would evolve into the Beatles, the dynamic within the band began to change quickly. Alongside them came George Harrison, a younger guitarist who impressed them with his precision and confidence. The group was still rough, performing under names like the Quarrymen before settling into their final identity. In those early days, there was no clear division between practice and performance, only constant experimentation. Lennon and McCartney began a songwriting partnership that combined rivalry with collaboration. Each tried to outdo the other creatively, which pushed both toward rapid development. They would sit with guitars or pianos, exchanging fragments of melody and lyrics, building songs through competition as much as cooperation. Unlike many bands of the era, they began writing original material instead of relying solely on covers. This decision quietly set them apart from other emerging groups in Britain. The energy between them was not always harmonious, but it was productive. Even disagreements became part of the creative process. At this stage, they were still performing in small venues, unaware that their informal sessions would eventually form the foundation of some of the most enduring music ever recorded. Hamburg and becoming a real band. The transformation of the Beatles from a local Liverpool act into a professional band occurred during their time in Hamburg, Germany.
These years were physically and emotionally demanding. The group performed for hours each night in clubs where audiences were often more interested in energy than musical refinement. Sets could last 5 to 8 hours, forcing the band to develop stamina and adaptability. This environment stripped away any remaining amateur habits. By the time they returned to Liverpool, they were no longer the same group that had left. Their sound was tighter, louder, and more cohesive. Hamburg also deepened their bond, not just as musicians but as individuals sharing an intense experience. They learned to respond to each other instinctively on stage, developing the chemistry that later defined their recordings. These performances were not glamorous, but they were formative. The repetition, exhaustion, and necessity of improvisation shaped their identity. When they eventually returned to Britain, they carried with them a level of discipline that separated them from other emerging bands. Hamburg was not a stepping stone in a romantic sense. It was a training ground that forced them to become professionals before the world recognized them as such. Brian Epstein and first breakthrough. The arrival of Brian Epstein marked a crucial shift in the trajectory of the Beatles. Epstein, a record shop manager with a keen sense for presentation, discovered the band at the Cavern Club in Liverpool. At the time, they were still performing in relatively informal settings, but he recognized something beyond their current status. He refined their image, introducing matching suits and a more polished stage presence. More importantly, he secured a recording contract with EMI. Under the guidance of producer George Martin, the band began translating their live energy into studio recordings. The release of Love Me Do marked their first chart presence in Britain, a modest beginning compared to what would follow, yet it signaled that their music had commercial potential. The collaboration between Lennon and McCartney became increasingly central during this period, with each contributing complementary strengths, Lennon's edge and McCartney's melodic structure. Epstein's influence ensured that their rise was organized rather than accidental, allowing their talent to reach a wider audience without losing momentum. This phase was still early, but it established the framework for what would soon become global recognition. Beatlemania and the weight of fame. By 1963 and 1964, the Beatles had become a global phenomenon. The intensity of public reaction, later labeled Beatlemania, transformed ordinary performances into overwhelming experiences. Crowds screamed before the band even began playing, often drowning out the music itself. Airports, hotels, and concert venues became controlled chaos. Paul McCartney, still in his early 20s, found himself at the center of this cultural surge. The speed of their rise left little time for adjustment. Despite the external noise, songwriting continued at an extraordinary pace. Lennon and McCartney wrote constantly, sometimes in hotel rooms, sometimes backstage, often under tight deadlines. This period produced some of their most enduring work, yet the psychological pressure of fame was significant. Individual identity became harder to separate from public image. Fans projected meaning onto songs that were written quickly, sometimes casually, yet were received as cultural statements. The scale of attention created a paradox. The more visible they became, the more distant private life felt. Even moments of rest were rare as expectations grew with each release and appearance. Fame did not simplify their lives. It complicated them in ways that were not immediately visible from the outside. Songwriting explosion and studio years. During the mid to late 1960s, the Beatles entered a highly creative phase that redefined popular music. Lennon and McCartney's songwriting partnership reached its peak, producing a vast catalog of songs that varied in style, structure, and emotional tone. Paul McCartney contributed melodies such as Yesterday, which emerged from a dreamlike state and stood out for its simplicity compared to the band's increasingly experimental work. Recording sessions became more sophisticated, with producer George Martin playing a key role in shaping arrangements.
The studio evolved into an instrument in itself, allowing the band to explore layered sounds and unconventional techniques. This period also marked growing artistic divergence within the group, as individual members pursued different creative directions. Despite internal tensions, the output remained remarkably consistent in quality. Songs were no longer just entertainment. They became cultural artifacts reflecting shifting social moods of the 1960s. The pace of innovation was rapid, and the band continually pushed boundaries of what recorded music could achieve. Each album expanded their artistic range, moving from straightforward rock and roll into more complex musical territory that influenced generations of musicians afterward. Loss, love, and life after the Beatles. The breakup of the Beatles marked the end of an era, but not the end of its members' creative lives. Paul McCartney later formed Wings and continued his musical career, exploring different styles while maintaining a strong melodic identity. His personal life also became deeply connected to Linda McCartney, whose presence provided emotional grounding after years of intense public scrutiny. Their partnership represented stability in contrast to the turbulence of fame. At the same time, the absence of former bandmates, particularly John Lennon and later George Harrison, created a long shadow over McCartney's later years. These relationships remained central to his identity, both musically and personally. As decades passed, reflection became more prominent than reinvention. Performances often carried emotional weight tied to memory rather than ambition. Loss and continuity existed side by side. While the world moved forward, earlier chapters of his life remained present in his music. This phase of life was not defined by a single narrative but by accumulation of experiences, relationships, and memories that continued to shape his artistic expression. Reflection at the piano in old age. In later life, Paul McCartney's relationship with music has become more reflective than performative. Sitting at a piano in a quiet room in London, he revisits fragments of songs that once defined entire eras. The speed of performance has slowed, but not the precision or emotional clarity. Each note carries layers of memory accumulated over decades. The songs of the Beatles remain present, not as relics, but as living structures that can still be re-entered through touch. At 83, time feels less like a linear progression and more like a stack of overlapping moments. Liverpool in the 1950s, Hamburg in the 1960s, global fame, personal loss, all exist simultaneously in recollection. The piano becomes a point of connection between these periods. Silence is as important as sound now. Pauses between chords often feel as expressive as the notes themselves. There is no need for performance in the traditional sense. Instead, there is continuity, a life still in conversation with its own past. In this quiet space, music is no longer about reaching outward, but about returning inward, where memory and sound continue to meet. Conclusion. Looking at Paul McCartney's life as a whole reveals a pattern shaped by contrast, public transformation and private continuity, extraordinary fame and deeply personal loss. From the modest streets of Liverpool to the global stage with the Beatles, his journey has been defined not only by success, but by endurance. The early death of his mother, the creative partnership with John Lennon, the intensity of Beatlemania, and the years beyond the band all form interconnected layers of a single narrative. What remains constant is music itself, serving as both archive and expression of lived experience. At 83, McCartney's relationship with that history is no longer driven by ambition or reinvention, but by reflection. The piano in a quiet London room becomes a symbol of that continuity. Each chord carries echoes of earlier decades, yet exists firmly in the present. His story is not closed, nor is it expanding in the way it once did. Instead, it is settling into depth. Time has not removed him from music. It has embedded him more deeply within it.
where memory and sound continue to coexist.